and trust has to be demonstrated because we know that trust could be there at 9 and be gone by 9:03.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm Meghan French Dunbar, and this is Unbehaved. And today we're going to talk about one of the ways many of us are conditioned to behave in the workplace, which is to just blindly trust whoever's in charge. Workers are told to listen to their leaders, to obey them, not challenge them. And organizational leaders or managers are simply demanding trust from people. But trust can't be forced. Trust must be built. I mean, think of your relationships outside of the workplace. If a friend or a partner withheld information from you or just told you things are fine when they're clearly not, it would chip away at the trust you've built with one another. And it would most likely lead to you walking away from that relationship at some point. So why is it that most of us refuse to tolerate broken trust in our personal relationships? Yet we don't do the same thing in the workplace. When leaders break trust by doing things like leaving employees out of decision-making, doing things that are unethical, or withholding information from people, we're made to feel that being behaved means accepting broken trust as par for the course. Today's incredible guest just called bullshit on this whole situation. Her name is Minda Harts, and she's the best-selling author of both the Memo and Talk to Me Nice, which is her most recent book. In it, she lays out what she calls the 7 trust languages, a framework that helps people build trust and, importantly, repair broken trust, both inside and outside of the workplace. And while this is a critical topic, Minda has an uncanny way of making it accessible and fun. I mean, fair warning, you're going to hear a lot of laughter in this one. We talked about all sorts of things, from the parallel between cheating ex-boyfriends and bad managers to the data that proves that trust isn't just a nice to have, that it's actually worth $344 billion a year, and the risk of outsourcing our humanity to AI. Whether you're that person at work who has a nagging feeling in the back of your head that something doesn't feel right, or the one who's wondering how to build an exceptional workplace, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. All right, Minda, you and I have something in common that I don't think that you know about because I've never told you about it. Cheating ex-boyfriends. Both of us legit surprising our boyfriends and coming home to find them with other women. Mine was Jimmy was his name. Yours was Scott, which is hilarious because I'm married to a Scott, and you talked about not being a Scott in the workplace. And I was like, oh, that's hysterical. But the thing that I found really interesting about your book and an insight that came up for me was I think we bifurcate our concepts of personal and professional. And as a part of that, there are things that we aren't willing to tolerate in our personal relationships that for some reason we tolerate in our professional ones. And your thesis of this entire book is that one of the primary things is we tolerate broken trust. Both of us come home to our cheating boyfriends, they're gone. Like broken trust, we're signed, sealed, delivered, we are over. And in the workplace, we're willing to tolerate, and we've normalized somewhat emotionally abusive relationships built on broken trust in many of the contemporary workplaces. And a lot of that, of course, is coming down to we have livelihoods, we have to put a roof over our heads, and it's really hard to change. What are the main consequences, mental health, physical health, whatever it might be, that you've seen of people staying in low trust environments for too long?
Where do we begin?
I know.
Well, I think this is something really important because I had like this aha moment on the way to the bathroom like a few years ago during COVID. And I'm like, oh, trust issues, right? Like you said, we normalize them at work, but we don't tolerate it outside of work to some degree. And I thought to myself, if people are saying bring your authentic self to work, trust is the same, right? I should have the same bar for trust in my personal and professional lives. And also too, it's not enough to do a trust fall at work and then go back to work and let somebody tell you lies or give you lip service, because you're not going to be able to do your best work. And I want people to realize that if you expect trust in your romantic and platonics, then you should expect that at a place you're going to spend 90,000 hours of your life at, right? Because you're not going to be productive. You're not going to do your best work. And if you're a company, you're not going to have good retention if people don't trust you. And trust isn't necessarily, I tell you all the things you want to hear, but it's also telling you when I don't have the answers, or yeah, you do hear the sirens and I'm not sure why, but you're not stupid, and you hear them, right? I'm not going to pretend that they're not happening. And I think that that's the piece of the puzzle that I want people to normalize, to say it's okay to talk about when we have these breakdowns, because let's get it back on the tracks.
Yeah. I'm curious as well about at least my experience of like the broken trust in my personal relationship was I started questioning myself. I took a bit of a hit, not a bit, a large hit to my sense of self-worth
Hmm.
and questioning like what I did wrong. And I'm curious how that manifests with employees and people who are working at really low trust environments. How much do you see people blaming themselves or taking them on this like guilt or shame or concern on themselves?
Yeah, I think we do that, right? And I talk about that in the book of what does trust look like to you, right? Because we don't typically ask ourselves, okay, what are the behaviors, what are the attributes or the characteristics where trust means something to me, right? It may mean something different to somebody else, but what's important to me? And people would tell me, oh, I don't trust my manager, or I don't trust my colleague, or I don't trust HR. What they were really saying was that there was this expectation that they had of someone else that they may not be aware of. And I say, okay, well, once you identify what it is you need to do your best work or to be most productive, what would it look like to advocate for yourself? Right. And I think that's part of it. Like, you're good enough to deserve humanity, dignity, and respect in every space you enter. And so what does it look like to have that conversation? Because again, I think sometimes things get lost in translation. I don't think anyone shows up to work, Megan, and says, how can I erode trust with Minda today? I hope they don't do that.
Right.
But it happens, right? Because of this communication crisis. And I think that we just have to normalize letting people know what good looks like to us. And some of us need to be reminded of that and be told, you should be able to tell someone when they've fallen short in a way that still enhances trust instead of erodes it.
Speaking of self-advocacy, I'm like, I don't even know if we've actually talked about this. Minda and I are in an authors group together, so we get to talk occasionally, but we don't do a lot of one-on-ones. So I asked you to be a speaker at my event, which was in January of 2020, the World Changing Women Summit. The memo had just come out. Everyone was talking about you. I was like, yes, we're going to get Minda. We were, I would say, like designing the flow of the event down to the last minute because we really wanted to have a conversation about the different experiences that white women and women of color were having in the workplaces in the context of a 200-person women-only gathering. And it meant that as you were looking for kind of answers on what this speaking engagement was going to look like, every time we came back to you, we had a different idea or concept. And we were just all over the place. And at some point, you like so gracefully were like, you know what? I don't know if this is going to be the right thing for me, like perhaps in the future. And you did it in such a like lovely way that I was like, I'm not even mad. Like I understand why she did this. But the thing that I've always just thought of you when I think of this is self-advocacy, is knowing at what point to say, meh, this isn't really working for me, and prioritizing your comfort as much as other people's comfort. How have you developed this? And I know that in the book you talk about it in the terms of being sensitive to yourself. How has this developed for you? Is it something that you've always had, or have you had to build this skill over time?
Yeah, well, thank you for acknowledging that, Megan. I do appreciate that. And I do remember, it was funny, I was actually going through some old emails and I'm like, wait, me and Megan have been connected for longer than and I'm glad it like came. But what I will say is, no, I haven't always been this person. I'm still practicing and flexing the self-advocacy muscle so much. And that's essentially what the trust languages is all about, is letting people know where your comfort level lies, and then they can opt in or out of that. But I can't assume that people are going to go around with a crystal ball and say, what does Minda need in this situation? And I think I was expecting that. And then I disappoint myself when people weren't showing up in the ways that I thought they could, or because I'm just grateful to be here, I shouldn't say anything about what trust or what comfort or what security looks like to me. And as I started writing about it and talking about it at different conferences, I thought, well, girl, you better be doing this for yourself too, right? Because we love to give advice to people on what they should be doing, but you have to demonstrate it too. And that goes back to the first question, is that self-trust, right? Am I trusting how this is how I'm experiencing a certain situation, good, bad, or indifferent, right? And then we can have open up communication, because a lot of trust breakdowns is just we aren't communicating expectations to each other. And I just wanted to give people language and tools to be able to say, okay, well, you know what it looks like when you just sweep it under the rug and then things just continue to get bad. What could it look like if we do it a different way?
I'm curious about people's responses to you because I always catastrophize and I'm imagining once I speak up and tell something, I'm honest about what I need, that I'm going to make someone uncomfortable or there's going to be conflict. I always just used to imagine there'd always be conflict if I spoke up
Hmm.
for myself. That's my own shit. But as you were practicing this skill, how did you feel like people responded or received your ability to just tell people what you need?
I think people were surprised initially, Megan, because I'm very accommodating,
Yeah.
to a fault at times. And I think once I started to shift the dynamics of, oh, you do have thoughts about this, oh, you do have a point of view on this, or you can say no. I think that kind of shook people in a different way. And I have to say, thankful to the therapists that have been helped me over the years to hone into that. I was not being trustworthy with how I was showing up to people, right? Because trust is a two-way street. And if I'm not being transparent, then that's an erosion of trust, right? And so I also wanted to demonstrate what trust looks like from me. And I think reassess and allow people to experience a different version of myself. And I feel like I'm better for it and people are better for it, because essentially what we're talking about is boundaries, right? And once people know where your line is, then they know, okay, I'm going to get up real close or I'm going to cross it or not. And I think it's the gray area with trust is where there are no boundaries and I'm silently suffering, right? And I
Mhm.
think that, to your point, it's saying it's not selfish for me to tell you what I need, it's selfless.
This point, I want to just hit on it a little bit more because my MO, I used to be a chronic people pleaser, super conflict avoidant. And one of the ways that this manifested, one was not telling anyone what I needed, just expecting everyone, quietly resenting them, maybe like talking poorly about them behind their back because of whatever they did that, they should have known, when in reality I hadn't been speaking up for myself. And when I had employees and team members, I was always like the nice boss who never gave people feedback. And as you pointed out with the trust languages, feedback is mission critical to trust. My experience of you when you spoke up and were like, you know what, I'm going to pass on this event was not like Minda. It was like, wow, I just watched someone draw a really clear boundary and I feel respect for you and I admire you. Like, I would like to be like that. Not to overgeneralize it, but it's been my experience that a lot of the women that I've talked to really struggle with advocating for themselves and providing feedback because they're worried about causing discomfort to other people. But what I'm hearing from you is that is making you untrustworthy. Like, it is a key element of trust. So how do you see this showing up and how do you help people move beyond the people pleaser mentality?
Right. Well, I also want to say that when I did have that conversation and you were so gracious, right? You weren't like, oh, I'm going to blackmail you for the rest of your life. Like you could have responded that way to me. You know what I mean? Like, but you didn't. And I was new in my, speaking practice at the time. And I'll tell you, I spiraled probably for months after that because I'm a former member of the Church of Rumination, right? I ruminate, ruminate, ruminate. But I realized that this is part of being a business owner. This is part of being, again, where people you set boundaries just again, and that's not just with that situation, but that's okay. What does good look like across the boards? And that's something that I know I needed for my well-being. And part of trust is letting people know what good looks like so that you don't have anxiety, so that you don't have the depression, right? One of the statistics by Gallup poll says that when trust is present, people are 74% less anxious, right? I can't control how somebody responds to what I've said, but I can control feeling better about, oh, I trust my voice, right? I trust that this is what I need so that I can show up better in other areas of my life. And that's what I keep like, people can't show you what good looks like if you don't tell them, right? And we can't, again, assume that people know what that is for us. And that's why I really created the trust languages, is because we are silently hoping and praying that somebody gives us security or gives us transparency or is more sympathetic. And people are like, no, I don't need that. So I'm not going to give that to you, right? And typically we give what we feel most comfortable in a trust language. And so I think, again, we're doing people a disservice when we don't tell them what it looks like, right? It's the
Mhm.
same. The trust language is also, I wrote it with a workplace context, but it's really also just about how we show up, right? Because say your partner, for example, they just want you to acknowledge that, hey, I know I don't have to make the breakfast, but you do make the breakfast every morning. And yeah, you should because I do all these other things. But just because that's how you might feel, it's like that person wants to be valued and they don't trust that you see them. Right. So you may not
Mhm.
need the gold star for everything, but somebody that you work with, somebody that you live with, they need that from you. And that's a trust language that they need you to speak. And I think we just have to be more empathetic and sensitive to what people need. And then when they tell us that, there's a choice. How we respond is also going to enhance or erode that relationship. And essentially, Megan, this is about relationship building too. And this is, I think, what we need no matter where we show up.
Yeah. One of the bigger realizations I had in my attempt to become better at dealing with conflict and communicate my needs was that withholding my truth was in fact a form of dishonesty. I hated finally coming to terms with that. And I feel like this is, again, something that we normalize in the workplace is withholding information from huge swaths of workers. You have this like fabulous story in the book. I think it was Stanley, the manager, who was very transparent with you about upcoming layoffs or like furloughs.
Mhm.
And as his report, you were like, oh my gosh, I'm so heartened that he talked to me about this. This makes it so I can plan for the future. But he had been told by management not to share this information with you. A lot of cultures are built on dishonesty, of
Mhm.
withholding information. And there's this, I think, one of the most common pieces of feedback, because I advocate for transparency. I talk a lot about open book management
Mhm.
and systematic ways in which the sharing of information actually improves the workplace. But people always push back and are like, well, if people have this information, they're going to panic. Or if people have this information, they can steal it and like go run their own, like, blah. For the anti-transparency crowd, I promise I'm getting to the question, like, what is the immediate pushback that you have when people are just like, no, I don't want to be transparent and share information with people? How do you get around that?
Yeah, well, I think people need to do a book club with both of our books because they complement each other really well. But I think that I'll put myself in this position. I grew up in a household, in a Black household, where transparency wasn't like the go-to, right? My parents like, don't tell people our business, right? No matter what, that was ingrained, right? And so I grew up kind of being like, well, nobody needs to know this about me, right? And so you have all of these friends that you know everything about, but nobody knows anything about you, right? And it's kind of a lonely place to be for a while. So when I get into like romantic relationships, I'd be like, you're not being transparent. And I'm like, well, what does that look like? Why do you need that? Why do you need this information? And, I'm okay with not knowing these things. And what I realized was some people need that clarity and honesty. And if you're not good at giving it, you need to check yourself and say why that is. Now, my manager gave us all the information, and maybe you're in a situation where you can't give everybody from A to Z what's going on. But what we can do is give people breadcrumbs. What we can do is humanize that somebody is on the other end of this email that we are sending. Someone's on the other end of this decision. And so, yes, I don't have all the answers today, but tell people that, right? If we just laid off 2,000 of their workplace friends, don't pretend that that didn't just happen. Acknowledge that, right? Yeah,
Yes.
we are going through hard times and we are making some adjustments, but we'll try to keep you in the loop, right? That, or we know that we're going to use AI tools, but it's moving so fast, so we don't have all the answers right now. That's what people need. They don't need to know A to Z, but they want you to acknowledge the elephants in the room. And I think as leaders, we can give that to people, right? We don't have to just pretend that everything is good when you know that everybody smells the smoke in the room. And I think that that is going to go back to the 74% less anxious. Yes, I don't know all the information, but they've given us what they have right now. And I think that's the piece that I hope leaders, I hope HR remember that people are human first and employees second. And that I know Jack Nicholson said you can't handle the truth, but people can handle the truth.
For people who manage teams, you have 7 trust languages. As the book has been coming out, have you found that there are any that people seem to be gravitating to as the lowest hanging fruit, or like the quote easiest or quickest ways to start rebuilding trust that people can just like get to in the next month?
Yes. So I find that one of the trust languages is security, and that's that psychological, emotional, and intellectual safety. And I think that so there's 7 trust languages. I don't expect we'll all be bilingual in all 7, but if you could reach for 1 or 2 tools, right? If I'm going to have a conversation with someone, maybe the conversation isn't that I'm going to give them more feedback when I know we already have some issues going on. Maybe I'm going to approach this conversation with some psychological safety, right? Because that's going to get the most. I'm thinking about how do I want this conversation to end? I'm not just thinking about getting what I need to say and moving on. I want us to be able to look each other in the eye on Zoom or in the hallway when we see each other at the next on site. And so having that psychological safety is important, right? If there is an issue, do you feel comfortable even coming to tell me? Because I know there's power dynamics at play, right? And so I think that people just need to provide that for people. And then the other one, a good low hanging fruit is acknowledgement. We're in a climate right now where everybody's not getting a bonus, everybody's not getting a salary increase, but we can tell somebody, you know what, thanks for that report that you did in Q4. If it wasn't for that insight, I don't know where we'd be today. Thanks, Meghan. Right? Or I know that I've been out on PTO for the last whatever, and thank you for making sure that my clients are still taken care of. I really appreciate that, right? Like that's going to make you feel seen and valued, and that's going to keep trust at the center because now you know I value you, right? And that's something that each and every one of us can do right now. Again, you may not care about being acknowledged. Your trust language is leave me alone and let me do my work, but somebody else's, they need that from you. They're craving that from you. And I think that no matter who you are, everybody appreciates being seen and valued for their work.
And I want to underline, it was fun to like see things that in both of our books, but something you just said that you also have in your book that I talked about in my book is the importance of specific acknowledgement, not like, great job last week, but I was out on PTO and I saw that you did this exact thing and this is how it helped me. Like the more specific and granular it can be, the better. So like just triple underlining that point. As you've been your previous research or as this has been going out and you've been consulting with other workplaces, have you found an example or two of like really great high trust workplaces that you're just like, oh, I love everything about what they're doing?
You know, I'll say this. I think a lot of workplaces are struggling, right? And with a lot of different things because we have a lot going on in our world. But what I do value and what I think is important is those workplaces who are taking the surveys, and many are seeing that trust has taken a hit and they're acknowledging that, right? And that they're working toward it and they're talking about it, because I think some companies, they're like, oh, we see that they said trust is an issue, but let's not acknowledge it. Let's move on to the next thing because that's like, you know, everything's fine here. And I love the company who knows that there's some room for improvement, right? Yeah, we haven't got it right. Yeah, we might have just laid off people. Yeah, we're having a bunch of reorgs, but we hear you and we see you. So let's have some conversations. Let's put some strategies in place so we can have better conversations. Those are the companies that I think win and they have better retention rates, I think, going forward, as opposed to the company that's like, just be happy you have a job, go sit back down, make sure that green light is still moving. And I feel like that is where I am optimistic that there's so many companies who are reaching out saying, please come talk to us about how we can communicate better and how we can continue to have better trust, even if it's taken a hit.
So I think you mentioned too already of the benefit of the high trust workplace being people not being as anxious. And then you just mentioned retention. And you had a line in the book that I was like, oh, that is so good. I mean, so many lines. The Casamigos thing, I was like hysterical. But you mentioned that when you're at a high trust workplace, you can raise hell together. And when you're at a low trust workplace, it's just hell. And I was like, oh, preach. I'm curious, this like raise hell together. You and I are both research dorks. Like, What is the business case for building a high trust culture?
Yes. Well, one thing I'll say is when trust is present, 24% more productive. So I don't know any company who doesn't want more productivity going to their bottom line, right?
Yes.
And another big data point is that $344 billion a year is lost in employee turnover, right? And so, listen, trust is not, again, we just put on our favorite Taylor Swift songs and we put on our robes and do the fall. It's actually good for business, right? This is good for your bottom line. And so I would encourage you to make sure that trust is in the room and not left in the bathroom or in the car, because this is good for your bottom line. It's good for your management. It's good for your mental health, right? And well-being in the workplace. And so trust is a business imperative. And I want to really hone in on that, because I think sometimes we think of trust as like this foo-foo thing, right? That it just is nice to have, but no, it's a must have. I definitely think in the way of there's no future of work without trust. And that's just kind of how I feel about it. So I feel like managers, you cannot afford the cost is you not being transparent, that's going to take a hit, right? You not providing psychological security inside the workplace, that's going to take a hit. You may not want to speak all these 7 trust languages, but get 1 or 2 in your toolkit, because that's going to help your team and their productivity.
Yeah, I think the Gallup State of the Workplace report came out this week, and global disengagements at 80%. And I'm like, if you keep throwing like unlimited snacks and pinball machines instead of working on trust and like basic systemic issues, like nothing is going to change. And so I'm just like, every human being that works at a company, go hire Minda, because she's going to save everything.
Well, bring us both. We need some. But I want to say something that you said, Megan, is that part of it is I think that oftentimes we think that trust is just automatic, right? And trust has to be demonstrated. Trust has to be, because we know that trust could be there at 9 and be gone by 9:03. And so it's really important that we have mechanisms where when we do fall short, again, not intentionally, that we talk about the things, right? Because I want to be able to have a team that I can trust, but we can't just as managers be like, well, I have to be able to trust you, but you don't have to trust me, right? And I think that anybody who they think that their employees are doing their best work under stress and ambiguity, you've got another thing.
Good luck.
Good luck. Good luck.
I'm curious. Well, this is just coming up. These managers, we've talked a little bit about some of the trust breakers, where it's like, here's some stuff that you're doing that I guarantee breaking the trust, like withholding information, all these things. Like, are there some of like just top trust breakers that you see that you're just like, this should be on a checklist of do not do at all costs if you're a manager?
Yes. So one of them, you wouldn't be surprised, is micromanaging.
Yes.
What is that demonstrating that, oh, they can't get their work done? Why did I hire you? I can't trust you. And I think that you may not think that what you're doing is micromanaging, but that person, that's signaling to them that you don't trust their work, that you don't trust that they're going to get it done. And so they are adults, right? You hired them for a reason. So let them do that unless they show you differently, right? Another one I think is email correspondence, right? Is oftentimes, I don't know if you've had this happen, I know I have, is that people will email you and CC somebody else on it that has no business being. And you're like, wait, why did you CC my manager on this when I just saw you in the break room, or I just had a Zoom with you and I create the narrative that you're trying to take me down, that you don't want me, that you're trying to get me in trouble. Whereas you might have just said, you know what, I CC'd our manager because I knew I'd respond. I get a response faster. So you're not thinking about how this is an erosion of trust to me, right? And so we create this narrative and neither of us have a conversation about it, right? So I just keep side-eyeing you every time I see you, and we typically don't have a conversation. And I think that that's another erosion of trust. Like, why wouldn't you come to me first instead of bringing somebody else in that, right? Or another one is a lot of us are using ChatGPT to help us write emails, right? And so what happens? I tell ChatGPT to do the thing, then you get it and you tell it to do the thing, and now they're just talking to you. Now we don't talk about it. And so we've missed the plot, right? And nobody's like humanizing each other and listening to what's really being said. We're just getting our grammar right and getting directly to the point. Whereas that, again, is we're outsourcing our humanity. And I don't think we think about it in those terms, but that's an erosion of trust, right? And I don't have the time to read this. I got to send it to somebody else. And they miss some of those nuances. And so these are things that we can do right away. I'm not saying don't use these tools, but don't let it take the place of humanizing and the nuance and the care.
So glad you brought this up. You had another line in the book. I think it was about productivity trumping humanity. And I was like, it's like pretty much what we've built the entire shareholder supremacy culture of business in the last 50 plus years. And AI. My God. So we have a friend who was just talking to us about how right now he is building the automations to essentially take over his role. Like they're pretty much making him dig his own grave. And I'm like, this is inhumane. This is so messed up that they're making him do this. And the place of trust with AI, like I know that this is an evolving topic, but for example, I was working with a consulting group. When the book was coming out, they were going to give me all sorts of strategy. And then when they came to me with the deck, they were like, okay, we put this into ChatGPT and here's what we came up with. And I was like, you didn't come up with this. ChatGPT did. Like, I feel it was a breach of trust for me that I was immediately like, I could have done this. I'm so angry. Why did I pay you? And this like stripping of humanity from the work process that more of us are getting conditioned to do. I know that you wrote the book before AI was like really coming online. How is your perspective with AI and trust and like how we continue to be humans first? How is it progressing? What's coming up?
Yeah, I am concerned, I'll say, because I think we've outsourced the humanity so fast, right? We're like, let it do it. And then I don't have to. Yes, we want efficiency. That's important. We want productivity, but we don't want to hand it over. And I hear so many people say AI is taking over. No, humans are the ones making these decisions. We are the ones opting in. And that is not trustworthy, especially when we don't give people a reason why we're doing it, right? We've heard some companies sending emails out and the morning of, and people not having their jobs or those sorts of things. It's like, did we have to do it this way? Right? Yes, we can bring in AI, but we could still upskill our employees so that they can also be part of the process. Let's make their jobs a little bit easier, but we don't have to make them easy enough where they don't have a job anymore, And I think that when we aren't transparent, when we don't have the conversations, when we don't have a feedback loop, then we again miss the plot. So I am concerned about our humanity. Again, I don't blame AI. We're creating these tools. We're training these tools. So where do we say, you know what? Yes, and we still have a workforce that needs to be empowered. And here's how we're using it to do that, not to eliminate you, right? To supplement your creativity, to help you do your best work. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about how the supplemental piece, right? And so I am concerned, but I do think that the more voices that show up and that we get to role model what trustworthy looks like, right? Be the manager that says, we're using this to supplement, not eliminate, right? Here's what it looks like, right? Yes, we are going to use this, but here's how it's going to help you in your job. Nobody's telling people that and part, dot, dot, dot. And I think that oftentimes it's because they don't know, right? But number two, talk about those things. Again, I think we just have missed the plot on people are not robots yet. They're still human. And so talk to them in a way that humanizes and respects them. And, again, all of it's evolving and we don't have all the answers. But what we do know is that humanity is the only thing that's going to solve this disconnect of trust.
I'm curious for you how your perspective of leadership has evolved. What skills are you relying on now the most that you maybe once didn't think of as leadership skills?
I think the how to have better conversations. I mean, yes, I like to talk, we like to talk, we get paid to talk, so you just like I'm good at this. But what I realized what I wasn't good at is sometimes being more sensitive, more empathetic to when people are telling me something. So, for example, someone might tell you, that manager said X, Y, and Z to me. How would that make you feel? And I would find myself saying, oh, I wouldn't care too much about that. I would just, da 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 da. And I had to stop myself to say, you know what? That may not impact me, but that's impacting you. And if I dismiss how it's making you feel, then that's impacting the relationship and the trust that you and I have, because you're going to not probably not going to come to me and tell me anything else about this situation because I've already eroded the trust. Again, not intentionally, right? So I think for me is listening to the things that people aren't saying. And that's having that
Mm.
emotional intelligence and realizing that my tone, my behavior, my actions, they have either a positivity toward trust or a negativity, right? And every situation that I encounter these days, I'm more hyper aware of, if I say or do this thing, is it going to enhance this relationship or erode this relationship? And I try really hard, Megan, even, at home or with family members, like, okay, I might want to say that thing, but let me pause, right? And I think the
Mm.
power of the pause is so important with trust with people. And I think it's not a soft skill, but it's definitely a leadership skill that I think all leaders should practice a little bit more.
You were building this fabulous career, low trust, all the things you've left. And then the Memo, two more books, your new bestseller, Talk to Me Nice. Like you're doing film projects. My story is that you've been following a bit more of like where your soul has been called rather than the traditional path. I call it soul success. How did you move from like, I'm building a career and trying to work myself up the ladder to I'm going to follow the pull wherever it is taking me. I'm going to follow my passion, my curiosity, the impact that I want to make. How has that looked for you for the last, it's been like 7 years, 6 years? And how is it informing where you're going next?
I love that. And I need that t-shirt. Soul success. Okay, please. Not putting another thing on your plate, but
It's a whole chapter in the book. We'll,
I
we'll discuss
know,
it
I
in our next
know.
thing.
That's
It's
why
going to be
I need
great.
the shirt. I'm like, where's the merch? Okay.
Oh my God.
It's interesting because I grew up very humble beginnings. And so the thing that really pushed me through much of my corporate career was money, 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 right? Security financially. How do I never return back to what I once knew? And so that really fueled a lot of my decision making, about, partnership and the latter. I never really sat back to think, what is it that Minda wants? And what if I trusted my gut to, could it be yes and could I be successful, but could I also do it in a way that feels authentic to me and creates longevity and makes spaces better than what I found them. And once I started to lean into that, I realized that I could be financially stable and still do good, right? And so that's always just helped me do, can I look myself in the mirror every morning and be happy with the decisions that I'm making? And that's kind of how even saying yes to things, right? Or saying no to things, does this enhance the path? Does it add to where I want to be? And part of that is I don't just do things that make it better for me, but I'm thinking about the next generation. Who's benefiting from my courage? And so I do things because I know as a woman, I benefited from so many women that I will never know their names, right? So many people that fought for pay equity, so many people that fought for voting. I may never know who they were, but I know I'm a beneficiary of that courage. And so that's what fuels me, is knowing that hopefully someone will be a beneficiary of my courage. And so I keep pushing the boundaries to some degree. I keep shaking the tables because I know that if I don't, then somebody doesn't get what they need later down the line.
One of the things we used to open some of our events with was asking people to think about whose shoulders they were standing on to be in the room, which I mean, this can be ancestral or the women coming before us or the
Mhm.
women of color. Like it is just such a grounding force to remember how quick this little time we have is, and it is a source of courage to hopefully make it better. But thank you for that. I want that on a poster. We are making t-shirts and posters after this. Curious about your current concept or definition of success for yourself. How do you think about success now?
I definitely think about it differently, but I think about success as peace. Maybe that's, I just had a birthday this week, so I think about like aging and longevity, but I think about the peace, right? If I'm making good decisions, then I'll have peace in my bank account, right? If I'm making good decisions with my interactions, then there's peace with my family members. There's peace with, those I love and with my colleagues, right? And so I think for me, it's just success is those things that make me still feel good. Right. And I know that that sounds like so cliche, but it's really Beyonce has a song line that she says, the feeling is everything. And it's the feeling for me. If I know that I'm writing books that, people email me and say, thank you for naming that, right? That's helped me have a better conversation with my manager or a better conversation with my child, then that brings me peace. And that means that what I'm doing is still working, and that's success. Right. And I started, Megan, writing the Memo thinking that would be the only book I'd ever write. It came out of a place of pain, and that I wanted to be able to create a space to be able to talk about things we weren't talking about. And I would have never guessed that I'd be on book 4, right? That was never the goal. And so I realized that not having a plan sometimes has been the best piece in some regards.
I love this. Like, even just you saying that success is peace, like I felt myself be like, take a breath and be like, yes. What are the things that you're starting to think about next that you're wanting to say that you're finding that people are shying away from?
You know what?
If anything.
I feel like I've been really fortunate and privileged to be able to say the things that I've wanted to say in a way that I think people may not be thinking about them. And that's what I really love about this current book, Talk to Me Nice, is because trust has been around for a long time, right? I didn't coin that phrase, but I'm asking people to rethink about what it looks like, right? And I was recently speaking at a real estate conference, and I was talking about the 7 trust languages. And I had a gentleman stop me in the hallway, and he said, I took a screenshot of that because I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I think we need to talk to her about what trust looks like and how she can cultivate trust and give trust. And that made me feel so good. And I thought, wait a second, these trust languages have so much more of a life to live. Right. And I think I'm just thinking about those ways in which we can still keep trust as the main character in every facet of our life. And you mentioned filmmaking. And so I'm telling stories that remind us of human connection, right? And where trust falls, and not because we want it to, but because sometimes our actions and our behaviors, and good or bad, they impact that. And so for me now, it's taking some of the concepts that I've written about and showing them through a different medium. Because let's be honest, some people will never read our books, Megan, but they might watch our, but they might catch the concept in other forms of storytelling.
Pretty sure everyone's read mine. The numbers. No. All right. Obviously, people can find you on the interwebs. Where do you hope people plug in with you most?
If you like to go to people's websites, you can go to mindaharts.com, and you can find me wherever you like to play in your social streets. But I spend the majority of my time these days on LinkedIn, so definitely find me there.
Yeah, and go grab Talk to Me Nice. It's just so damn good. You're so good. Oh, thank you. Just profound gratitude.
Well,
for everything.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me a long time ago when a lot of people were probably afraid of the Memo. And I appreciate you for being here and still rocking with me. So thank you.
All right, friend. Thank you so much for joining me on Unbehaved. If you are vibing with today's episode, I cannot tell you how much a good review means to me. You can find me on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, etc. I love hearing from you. Honestly, I read all of the comments, so please reach out. You can also look me up at MeghanFrenchDunbar.com or on the social medias to stay in touch. I think I'm supposed to have some sort of like cheesy catchphrase here to wrap this up, but in the spirit of unbehaving, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to subject you to that, and I'll just let this epic stock music play me out instead. Bye-bye.